We've gone over articles written by Flinny O'Toole plenty of times on this channel, quite probably because, again, just like Ian Dunt, he has been one of the best journalists covering the whole Brexit crisis and just generally what's going on. And I said one of the first big videos that got a lot of traction on my channel about Brexit was the fact that I went into we covered an article basically saying how Britain and the Brexiteers wanted to bring back the British Empire and examples of what they were doing, and that English exceptionalism and this whole notion of like empire and stuff was coming back to haunt us, even though it was a bad idea and no one wanted to be, as India put it at the time, we do not want to be an imperial bazaar. So one good thing that has come of this is that it has done and tarnished that English exceptionalism. And it is a good thing that has happened, because we as a country, as a nation, really need to look at ourselves and just go, who really are our friends? Because they're certainly not the Tories, and it certainly isn't Donald Trump. So, the coronavirus has exposed the myth of British exceptionalism. There is now the terrible possibility that Britain may match or even overtake Italy and Spain as the country in Europe that suffers the most from the coronavirus pandemic. This tragedy is political as well as biological and epidemiological. Those seeking to trace its path may look back on a telling moment. Paradoxically, the one in which the government finally changed the course and fell in line with most of the rest of Europe on the 20th of March. Boris Johnson announced the closure of pubs, clubs and restaurants. Even as he did so, however, it was made clear that his decision was an assault on the national character. We're taking away the ancient inalienable right for freeborn people of the United Kingdom to go to the pub, he said. And I can't understand how people feel about that. Let his anguish be in no way any doubt that he underscored the point to repeat, I know how difficult it is, how it seems to go against the freedom-loving instincts of the British people. The message was, what exactly? You must not go to the pub, but your right to do so is inalienable, which is to say, absolutely irrevocable. You must stay at home, but if you do so, you will be a disgrace to your freedom-loving ancestors. The Sun reported the Prime Minister's remarks rather differently. Mr. Johnson said he realised it went against what he called the intelligible freeborn right of people born in England to go to the pub. In this version, the freedom to go to the pub was conferred by genetics and history, not on the people of the United Kingdom or the British people, but on the people born in England. It does not apply to Scots, the Welsh or Northern Irish people, and certainly not to the 9.4 million people living in the UK who were born abroad. It is a particular Anglo-Saxon privilege. And since we are in the terrain of the ludicrous, the Sun's version actually made more sense. There is, of course, no ancient and absolute right to go to the pub. Inns and public houses have been regulated in England at least since the 15th century. But what Johnson was really evoking was a very specific English sense of exceptionalism, a fantasy of personal freedom as a marker of ethnic and national identity. The exceptionalism is not, alas, mere rhetoric self-indulgence. It helped to shape the official policy of the COVID-19 crisis. It lies beneath both the idea that there should be a distinctive British response to this global challenge and the assumption that there was something particularly unnatural in expecting Brits to obey drastic regulations. Its legacy is the globally discredited policy of herd immunity and the late introduction squandering Britain's head start of the lockdown. The Prime Minister himself has had long cultivated the notion that he does not just expose his freedom-loving exceptionalism, he embodies it. In the earlier stages of the crisis, Johnson's admirers could see it as his finest hour. This moment was his Churchillian posturing would become real and he would save the country. When the Prime Minister was hospitalised, his overwrought friend and fan Toby Young confessed in The Spectator a kind of mystical belief in Britain's greatness and her ability to occasionally bring forth remarkable individuals who can serve her at times of critical junctures. I've always thought of Boris as one of those people, not just suspected it, but now I know it in my bones. Johnson's Churchill impersonation has always been a way of claiming that his own waywardness is not mere self-indulgence, but the mark of a special and idiosyncratically English destiny. In his book, The Churchill Factor, he wrote of his idol. There is a sense in which Churchill's eccentric and humour helped to express what Britain was fighting for, what it was all about, with the ludicrous hats and rompers and cigars and his excess of alcohol. He contrived physically to represent the central idea of his own political philosophy, the enabler right of British people to live their lives in freedom, to do their own thing. Guess what that meant? Guess who this was meant to bring to mind for the contemporary readers? Being drunk on freedom is one way for the chosen people to do their own thing. Adopting a destructive national approach to global pandemic is another. The myth of a unique and defining love of personal freedom as a badge of nationhood is underpinned a profound reluctance to impose life-saving restrictions on movement and social gatherings. Other people might put up with this sort of thing, but not the English. On the altar of his exceptionalism, lives have been sacrificed. This innate genetic resistance to conformity is a myth, and it is obvious from the presence of an equal and opposite cliche of Englishness. The quote from George Orwell could rhapsodize. The gentle-mannered, under-motivalized, law-abiding English and the orderly behaviour of English crowds, the lack of pushing and quarrelling, the willingness to form queues. The anthropologist Katie Fox wrote, during the London riots in August 2011, I witnessed looters forming an orderly queue to squeeze through one at a time. Through the smashed window of the shop, they were looting. Orderliness is just as prominent as waywardness in the English self-image, which suggests that neither of these truisms is ancient, inalienable, or worth a damn when you're making policy in a time of plague. The exceptionalism, free-loving instinct has little to do with history and much more to do with current politics, and specifically the politics of Brexit. Johnson described as magnificent a 2014 book by the arch-Brexiteer Daniel Hannan called How We Invented Freedom, we being the Anglo-Saxons. Hannan expressly reclaimed the idea of exceptionalism. The freedom-loving Anglo-Saxons have been the exception of exceptionally to Europe's slavishness of Brexit, he argued, with one imperative in this dichotomy. Tragically, a notion that the UK should ignore the World Health Organization and does so its own thing with the virus, but the virus was its whole other. The COVID-19, as Johnson himself discovered in the most awful way, doesn't make exceptions. The threat is universal, and the shield against it, the NHS, is cosmopolitan and global. There are 200 different nationalities represented in its ranks by 150,000 doctors, nurses, and auxiliary staff. One consideration in this disaster is the realization that Britain is exceptionally lucky to have them. Yeah, I completely agree. You see this now with whether it will actually change, but obviously the Tories brought in this new points-based immigration system, and many of these people who currently are fighting for us on the front lines of the NHS do not meet the requirements. And when it comes into force, they will have to leave, even though they put their lives during on this time for pandemic. So clearly, you can't really put a value on people coming to this country.